Hello, open world chatters. I'm sorry, I'll figure out a name for you soon. Anyway, this episode we were joined by the illustrious and brilliant Caitlin Rosberg. You might know them from their Eisner and Hugo-winning work at Uncanny Magazine, Taste Magazine, the AV Club, or Shelf Dust, where they regularly write about all things nerdy. Caitlin is one of the most thoughtful writers in what was once known as the nerd blogosphere, and we were extremely excited to talk with them about the newest version of Dune and how faithful translations can sometimes fail the source text even harder. Check it out. So, Caitlin, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. We are here to talk about form, genre, medium, and the ways that our nerd storytelling travels between all three of those different items. Do we want to talk about what's what first? I think we set some parameters.
First, we'll say if that lead in made absolutely no sense to folks listening out there, just hang with us.
Right?
We got this.
So what I think not everybody knows about me is that my first grown-up job is I was actually a high school teacher. So, and then I went on to do like more academic studies. And one of my biggest frustrations with the way that we talk about pop culture as like academic type people is that we tend to use jargon that's not the same as everybody else, right? So like it just gets confusing so quickly. And that's why I was like, no, let's start with like talking about what these terms could mean. And I don't even know that, like, I think that if you asked 10 people that like talking about pop culture, the difference between genre, form, format, and medium, I'm not sure that you'd get them all to agree, if I'm honest. Like, I think that people would find some squish in there. I think genre is probably the easiest, right? That's like the theme of your content. So is it a superhero story? Is it a sci-fi opera? Is it a space western? You know, you could absolutely find subgenres and you can like mash stuff together, but I think genre feels pretty comfortable for most people. And then medium is how the content is delivered, right? Is it a movie? Is it TV? Is it TV miniseries? Because that could be different than a TV series.
Is it poetry? Is it a painting? Right?
Exactly. Is it prose? Is it a digital short? Like there's so many varieties there. And then I would say form is the structure of the content. So if genre is the theme of the content, form is the structure of the content. Is it first person prose? Is it omniscient narrator? Is it formatted as a history or a memoir or, you know, like that kind of stuff. So that's where I start from. And I think that that's part of why Dune is so fascinating, is that like it digs into all three of those in very different ways than I think we normally talk about our pop culture. So
explicitly too, because, you know, you've got, on the one hand, and just a confession that a lot of, as far as the Dune conversation goes, a lot of what we're going to be talking about right now is informed heavily by Ritesh Babu's absolutely brilliant essay in his newsletter about the way that Dune's the most recent film adaptation of Dune kind of failed the source text in a way that was surprising, because I mean, when I first watched it, I saw a almost slavish translation of the plot of the book. But what I didn't notice, and what Ritesh I think did a brilliant job pointing out, was how it really failed the how. It failed in the how of the translation.
And so, we'll get into that because I completely disagreed with him.
Ooh,
I'm excited.
I like disagreeing. So yeah, where the hell was I going with that? I disappeared in my own butt for a second there.
Isn't that just like most of talking about pop culture though, is disappearing into your own butt? It's a little bit of navel gazing. Yeah,
pretty much. So Dune. I mean, Dune was the Dune novel was a lot of things. It was genre mashups, but it was also kind of a very subtle twist on forms that I think I'm not necessarily used to reading that it was presented as a history, right?
So, and this is something that I find personally really fascinating. because I think that we are exposed to this style of storytelling a lot more than we think we are, but we don't notice it. And I think that, so Ritesh's whole piece was talking about the fact that if you read the kind of start notes at the start of every chapter, it's framed as there's encyclopedia entries that you are reading before you get into the plot of the story. They're all written by the same person, and it's framed as this is historical and cultural knowledge that the occupants of the world of Dune already know. And you, as an observer of this story, need this context. Number one, I think a lot of people skip that stuff, right? Like, I genuinely think that when people are reading a book, especially something as dense and long as Dune, they are likely to skip like a tiny little italicized paragraph at the start of a chapter. But if you think about the framework of a story within a story, all of J.R.R. Tolkien's work is like that.
Yep.
The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings are framed as memoirs written by hobbits.
Yep.
I jokingly said to my friend Manu the other day, like, they're actually just big, long recipe blogs because they're like framed around like food and cooking so much that I'm like, this is just somebody trying to up their SEO on their recipe blog. That's all the Hobbit is. But we don't like the Lord of the Ring movies didn't really feature that story very much. Like they didn't frame the movies the way that the books frame the story, right? Mm-hmm. The same thing with Princess Bride, which I would argue is actually probably the most successful use of that trope. It is not, kind of to your point, Jim, it's not a slavish retelling of the plot, but it is very tightly oriented towards the form of the book. Right. And if you haven't read William Golding's The Princess Bride, it is a genius book. He has written it pretending to be an academic that is editing a history that is boring. And he's pretending to be a historian that is cutting out all of the bullshit in a book that someone else wrote hundreds of years ago. But he has this like marginalia and these like footnotes and stuff where he's like, this is where I cut out 30 pages of talking about the various hats that the women were wearing. And instead of devoting themselves to that, because I think that would be hard in a movie, Rob Reiner and everybody said, okay, we're going to take a grandfather and a grandson and turn it into a story within a story this way. And I think that like, if you remember that it's a story within a story and you're being given cultural context, we do actually have a lot of stories that are like that, but we forget that that's what they are.
Yeah, that's totally fair. That's totally fair. But Lord of the Rings did the same. So Lord of the Rings, actually, now that you pointed it out, the Lord of the Rings adaptations are exactly the same as this new Dune adaptation, but they've been celebrated and a lot less kind of controversial. What do you think is behind that? Is it just time?
I think it's partly time. I think it's also partly that J.R.R. Tolkien's work is very specifically European. It's very specifically white European. So a lot of the conversations to be had about that are different. And one of the reasons that I appreciated the piece that Ritesh wrote that you mentioned is that at the very end, he also links to a bunch of articles about the lack of Middle Eastern and North African representation in the Dune movie. And one of the things that gets lost in translation a lot when we talk about Dune is that it was a not so subtle conversation that a science fiction author was having with his own culture's history of violence in a very real place. The whole context of Frank Herbert's work has to be understood as him having a conversation with West white Europeans' experiences in the Middle East and North Africa. And I think that leaving that part out is actually just as egregious as leaving like the form of the content out, that like, we're not really discussing the fact that, you know, this is a Messiah story about a white dude in a Middle Eastern North African setting. And it is supposed to be a criticism of that. It is not supposed to be a wholehearted endorsement. And there's just layers of story there that kind of get left out.
It's Olympic level point missing.
It is, but it's also, it's not like, I think a lot of people look at this kind of science fiction and this time of science fiction, right? We're talking John Carpenter of Mars, like pulp, sci-fi, space western, fantasy, genre mashups. People don't consider the politics behind it because they assume that there isn't politics behind it.
Right.
The same way they do with superhero stories, right? Like, this is not a surprise.
Right.
Yeah. But I do think that we are having more nuanced conversations about this adaptation. Number one, because time. I think everyone is a little bit more educated about some of this stuff. And number two, I genuinely think it's because nobody likes Denis Villeneuve. Peter Jackson's like a nice, affable dude, and it looked like everybody on the set of Lord of the Rings was having a good time, right? Like, they also filmed all of the movies together all at once, right? Like, there's so many like production quality differences between the two. And sorry, is it Denis or is it Denis Villeneuve? I never know. I think it's Denis Villeneuve.
Oh, I have no idea. I've never heard that question.
I stopped being super worried about it when he started yelling at me for not going to a movie theater.
Yes, okay, valid. So I think that a lot of people are responding to Villeneuve, and they're also responding to Timothée Chalamet rather than necessarily the movie. Because like,
he's so little.
He's very little, and I think that unfortunately he has been stereotyped as this heartthrob, like this teen heartthrob thing. There's a little bit, this is a very specific weird thing, but I have noticed a lot of folks closer to my parents' age that are looking at him and seeing, I'm 35. My parents are in their mid 70s. So this is but no. This is past Gen X. This is significantly,
Old man Odom heaves a sigh of relief here.
No. But I am noticing that there's this assumption that Timothée Chalamet is popular because he's hot in a Tiger Beat kind of way. Instead of like the way people felt about Elijah Wood or Sean Astin, or like the whole like quantity of the hobbits, but in particular Elijah Wood and Sean Astin, because they were child stars. There was like a better understanding of what their history was as actors, whereas Timothée Chalamet, I think a lot of people are like, oh, he was that guy that was in that gay movie.
Yeah, I don't get that, to be honest. I hear nothing but praise of him as an actor, and a little bit as an enigma because of some of the context you're talking about. But first and foremost, when I read and hear commentary, particularly about this movie, it's about his acting chops.
That is super fascinating to me, and I'm wondering if this goes back to the theme, right? I wonder if it's a difference between people who like the medium of film versus people who like the genre of science fiction. Because a lot of the people that I'm hearing that feedback about Timothée Chalamet about are people who love science fiction but are not big movie buffs. So I'm wondering if movie buffs are like, oh, I love Timothée Chalamet. There's a lot of talent there. Whereas sci-fi fans are coming to it from a perspective of, the only time I've ever heard of this kid is that gay movie set in Italy. So like, maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, and pop culture buffs as a distinct population.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so fascinating to me.
I don't know. He's got maybe it's the Willy Wonka prequel, but he's got a very like Johnny Depp origin story vibe to him.
A little bit, yeah.
But also, I think I knew very little about him going into the movie, and I expected like kind of a affectless Zoomer, nothing. And he was much more substantive than I think I had expected. I'll admit, I like Dune a lot when I watched it, and I still like it even kind of recognizing its faults after the fact. I thought it was by far the most enjoyable Villeneuve movie that I've seen. It took me 3 tries to get through Blade Runner, and I loved Blade Runner. It took 3 sittings to get through it the third time that I actually I finally made it.
Clearly, I'm going to be the contrarian in this entire conversation. Maybe that's my role here today. I love Blade Runner.
My science fiction inroads was my dad. He loves science fiction. One of his favorite comics when he was younger was Silver Surfer. So like when we're talking about like space opera level science fiction, right? And when I was like 13, he got me started on like Heinlein and like really just like threw me into the deep end feet first. So like I love stuff like Blade Runner. There's so many different ways to approach science fiction. And I think that the coolest thing about understanding the difference between genre and medium and tone and all these things is that like Blade Runner and The Fifth Element are both equally incredible pieces of science fiction, even though tonally they are completely at the opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that that is the coolest thing about science fiction in specific, is that like you are imagining something that doesn't necessarily need to exist right now.
Right.
And so you can kind of do whatever you want with it. The thing that I love the most about this version of Dune is that the visuals matched what I had been imagining so closely, and the sense of scale, like the first time I saw Star Wars, I saw it in theaters. My dad did not show me the original trilogy of Star Wars until it came back into theaters. This is my favorite story about my dad. I love my dad to pieces. He's the coolest pop culture dad. So it was right before the prequels were coming out, right? So 1, 2, 3 were about to come out. So it's like late 90s. He takes me to the movie theater in the mall and we see 4, 5, and 6. And as we're walking out of 4, he looks at me and he says, "So what did you think?" And I said, "I think Luke and Leia are going to fall in love and end up together forever." And he did not spoil it for me. He absolutely could have. Nobody would have blamed him. But like, he let me experience the movies the way he had experienced them. And I think that that is so cool. And like thinking about the sense of scale in Dune, the only thing I can relate it to is when we saw like interior shots from like the first couple of Star Wars that, you know, now it's like a painted background with like actors moving across it.
Right.
And I was like, I cannot comprehend the sense of scale in this film. It's one of the first sci-fi movies where I'm like, how did they manage to make it feel like the correct size, right? Like, yep. I just haven't seen that in any science fiction before.
You could have cut 5 seconds off of every single establishing shot and made the movie a half an hour shorter, and I still would not have changed a single shot or a single edit in this entire movie. I agree completely.
I will also say, kind of just to go back and make sure that like I'm not a Villeneuve hater, Arrival is also one of my favorite science fiction movies. So like, yes. I like his work a lot. I think that Arrival is actually a great example of a story within a story, right? Like it is, because
there's
like,
the flashback pieces. Yeah.
There's the flashback pieces. It is a story within a story, and you don't realize what's happening until the chronology allows itself to get all linked up.
Yep.
So like, we know that that's a possibility within film. We know it's a possibility within Villeneuve. I think the question becomes, did he make an intentional choice to not do that? Or like, what was the thinking? And obviously this is all speculation, right? Like we're not going to know, but like, it's almost like, is Star Wars a fundamentally different experience if you remove the scrolling at the beginning?
This is you're gonna send me into a tangent because I've got a 4-year-old and a 4-month-old, and I am struggling with how to introduce it. Okay. And you know, I think I'm leaning in the direction of the hatchet cut, 4, 5 prequels, 6, and then pretend 7, 8, and 9 never happened.
I'll be honest, as someone who was exposed to this as like a preteen, so I was like 11, 12.
Yeah.
I would actually go in chronological order. I would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
But
I'm telling you this because fundamentally, I could not experience 1, 2, and 3 without hating both a character and an actor because I knew where it was going. And I think that that is a bad storytelling experience for a viewer unless you can figure out how to make. You need to make a choice. Either your characters and protagonists are unlikable and you're okay with them being unlikable, or you want them to be sympathetic and you have to set your views up for success.
And Star Wars doesn't work without Anakin being sympathetic.
Yeah.
That's the problem. And like, kind of linking it back to Dune is like, it would be really easy to make Paul an inherently unlikable character if you had a bad actor or a bad director that didn't understand like the way Paul's story works. It would be so easy to be like, oh, poor little rich boy, you know, like,
yeah,
right.
But it, like, I felt I was emotionally invested in this.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted him to have an opportunity to make choices for himself, to protect his mother, to avenge the loss of people that he cared about. And it wasn't about money and imperialism.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And
maybe that was the choice.
And I would toss in too that I think the credit for that fully and the whole experience goes to the actors. I think this movie was extraordinarily well cast because the script was very thin on character. They had to fill in the whole thing with their pure acting ability, which harkens back to the difference in forms because we don't have actors in the books. But anyways,
and
give cred.
Yep. And a lot of this movie rested on kind of glances, right, and shoulders, and I think maybe that was the choice. Maybe the choice was because the when you're telling this story as a history, as a cultural experience, that the culture of the Empire in Dune's future. Actually, I just remembered that there was also a couple of spots in this where I feel like the bagpipes and the dates given, those, I feel like those were changed from the books to tie things a little bit closer to our world, right? To make it feel like it's some potential future of ours and not some disembodied sci-fi story.
Well, the thing about Dune is you could sort of pick and choose either way you wanted to go with that. So that was part of one of the great things about the book. Now, you brought up history again. So this is where I'm going to give the pushback. And, I didn't disagree with the sort of cultural context of the piece we're talking about. But this idea of presenting it as it's actually a history, I think the way that he structured the article basically came down to it looks like a duck, it sounds like a duck, it acts like a duck, its DNA is that of a duck, but it's not really a duck. I mean, it ain't the Silmarillion we're talking about here. And so I think the only thing about that article then is if you get into it, I think he's expressing a subjective experience of the film. And then you don't want to let his subjective experience of the film overwrite what your subjective experience of the film was. And mine certainly was not as a history. And I don't really even see how that fits. I mean, it leans heavily on this idea, this device of putting quotes at the beginning of each chapter. That's hardly the only book that does that. And I might be wrong because I haven't read this thing since I was a teenager, and you don't want to know how long ago that was. But I don't think the beginning of every one was from. I think we had some quotes from the Orange Catholic Bible leading into some chapters. So I don't think it's a clean fit. And I think he's kind of trying to make a square peg fit into a round hole there.
I love that you brought up the Silmarillion because I think that kind of harkens to the question that Ritesh and I kind of are both asking of it. I agree with you that my experience of the movie was very different from my experience of the book, right? Like the context of the book was different than the context of the film, which happens when you translate things from one medium to another.
Oh, and it should.
Exactly. I think the question becomes, would the experience of viewing a film with the same context as the book make the experience of viewing the film fundamentally different, number one, and fundamentally better, number two? And I don't know the answer to those questions. And I think the answer to the second question in particular is definitely going to be subjective, right? Because part of why I love big stories like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, etc., is the expanded universe knowledge that comes with them. I love knowing why it was important that Galadriel gave Gimli some of her hair. That is not discussed in the film at all, but it is like a really cool piece of lore that like expands the understanding of the film if you know it, and I think that the question of Dune is like, if you have more of that knowledge, is it a better experience? I think for me, it would be. I think for a lot of people, it wouldn't be, though. And I think the question is, especially when you're adapting something that is as well known and beloved as Dune, how do you balance the needs of the folks that are already fans with the folks that are coming to it with zero context? And that's a very hard question.
It's a really hard question, and it's hard because it's there's no overriding answer. Right. Mm-hmm. I think my reading of The Lord of the Rings, for example, enhanced my experience of the films. On the other hand, and this isn't exactly a fair comparison because this is going to be a novelization of the film. But I remember when I was young reading the novelization of The Empire Strikes Back. And then I went to see the movie and all the buildup. I'm like, what? I know what's coming. Don't you know what's coming? Yeah. What's it? You know what? Yeah. And so there, you know.
And that's a good question too, of what order do you do it in?
Yeah.
Right? Like, do you watch the most popular version or the most well-known version of a thing and then go experience the expanded universe knowledge?
I think our collective decades of being superhero comic book fans should inform our knowledge that there is no right or wrong way to do this stuff, right? Like true. I came into Dragon Ball Z in the middle of the Garlic Jr. saga, and I caught up with it after the fact on planetnamek.com, like reading scans of the manga. So like, yes. You know, everybody's going to experience this stuff differently. And I think I think the link here to my other kind of general nerdery is that the existence of the Dune novel as a cultural history, as a document within a larger universe, it's the same thing that happens with the superhero stuff, right? Mm. The implications of the superhero shared universe allow for shorthand in storytelling. Mm-hmm. And a kind of shared collective reality that is implied by the history in Dune, or the presentation of Dune as a history, mm-hmm. right? So it makes the universe, which a book that was already extremely grand in scope, it just widens it even further, right? And I think that the way that the movie kind of caught that grandiosity is like we've been saying, is its biggest success. But at the same time, I think maybe the choice that the movie made to not present it as a history was also intentional to narrow the scope to Paul, because the book is a history of the Empire, right? The book is a history of the Atreides line, not Paul's story. And the movie is Paul's story.
Well, I mean, this is part of that example. And I think a clearer example would be the movie versions of Moby Dick. I mean, much of Moby Dick is, let's talk about how whaling works, so on and on and on and on. You know, that's a serious chunk of the book to leave out, but it doesn't work as a movie. Yeah. I think the scale of Dune doesn't match the scale of the book because it's movie scaled. It's its own version of scale that in some ways you can compare, but you know, the media are so different. In some ways they really don't compare.
I'm wondering also now if we are a little bit hobbled by, we are having a conversation about one movie in what is expected to be a trilogy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, they're going to do 3?
They want to.
Yeah, they want to. Now, the thing, I have mixed feelings about the way that they approach the fact that, like, we're going to release Dune. Oh, P.S., this is part 1. Like, that felt weird to me. But what if they're pulling in Orange is the New Black? Dune part 1 is Paul's story. Who is the star of Dune part 2? Who is the part of Dune star part 3? Like, you have an opportunity, if you want to tell the story from other perspectives, to expand it. Like, one of the big complaints has been like, why were you advertising Zendaya as like a star of this movie and she's only in it for 7 minutes? Well, Chani is a huge part of later parts of the novel,
right?
So like we know the I guess the end product of the first film. We don't know the end product of the series. You know, we don't know what the strategy is for the series. And I think that opens the door to some pretty interesting options, honestly. And again, given that I like a lot of Villeneuve's other work, I'm kind of excited to see what he decides to do with it. So
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got a lot more to go.
Yeah. I wonder if part of this conversation, Jim, to kind of go to what you were saying, is like, we're all comics nerds. I love comics. Comics are great. Comics are also, in a lot of ways, deeply more accessible than Dune. Like, yeah, there's like decades and decades of backstory that you might need to sift through. But if you really wanted to start with something new, you could be like, cool, New 52, Ultimates, whatever. Like, you could pick a time, dive in. Dune is such a massive undertaking as a reader. And yeah, you can read Wikipedia or like, WikiHow sites or whatever you want to, but like, it does not have the size and scope of fandom or accessible starting points.
Right.
Like if you want to read Dune, you just have to sit down and read Dune.
Yeah,
It's
right.
like,
brutal.
Well, it doesn't. Well, nor does it have the cultural penetration, right? Like you ask anybody on the street who Superman is, they will know who Superman is, right? You ask anybody in the street who said with great power and great responsibility, 95% of people will tell you accurately who that is, and the other 5% will be deliberately trolling you. Right?
Boy, I hope they could tell you.
Right.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So there is kind of cultural knowledge that's already there on the superhero universe. And it was like that even before superhero media took over the world.
Well,
that's the persistence of a media too. I mean, you don't have the same persistence with a book or a film. And that anyways, that's an aside, obviously.
Yeah. Sure.
But I think it's a good one because, like, okay, let's say somebody unlike us, unlike my dad, not a huge sci-fi reader, has never read Dune, is okay with like Star Wars or whatever, but is not their favorite thing in the world. They're not like a fandom geek, They go see Dune. They love it. What do they do next?
Read the book. And that's the only option.
Right,
and God,
because like,
please do not read the ones that Frank Herbert did not write.
No, well, but then the next question is, okay, so they've managed to read Dune. Let's assume that they don't have small children and they have a flexible job and they get 8 hours of sleep a night, and so they can manage to get through the book.
What is that like?
Right. What's after that? If it's someone that's brand new to the space, the instinct is going to be, okay, who were Frank Herbert's contemporaries?
Yeah.
I don't know that I would recommend most of that stuff to most people. Like,
well, you could do what I did and then go pick up the Green Brain and be sorely disappointed.
I think it's really one of the big things for me, especially with comics, is like, let's say somebody walks into a movie theater, doesn't know anything about comics, right? Like they're going to go see Robert Pattinson's Batman, and that is their first exposure to Batman. What has the industry done to set that fan up to understand what to do next if they want more?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. And DC has actually kept a lot of their stuff that matters in print, in trade form.
I mean, DC also had like a huge Wonder Woman celebration when the first Wonder Woman movie came out. Like DC has been pretty consistent about making comics fairly accessible, but like Dune as a book is not going to be accessible to a lot of people. Yeah. I don't think I would point most people towards like Heinlein. I just wouldn't, because there's a lot of stuff that comes along with that.
Dangerous.
Yeah. Free love space libertarians. Yeah.
That's the thing. So I'm like, okay, I also wouldn't want to point him towards Orson Scott Card. Like there's so many of Frank Herbert's contemporaries that I'm like, versus like, if it's someone that managed to successfully read Dune and enjoyed the experience, I'd be like, cool, N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth trilogy. Yep. That is exactly where you should go next. But like, who's a tastemaker?
I would also maybe point him at the what the hell, the S.A. Corey books, the Expanse books. Yeah, because they're big in the same way.
Yeah, I think the question becomes, and this is a question for people like us, right? People who are critics or reviewers or podcasters of like, theoretically, there has to be a fourth estate, if you will, of tastemakers that are there to help people find the next great thing that they want to experience. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of times with movies, you just kind of like walk out of the movie theater and you're like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
I occasionally wish that like we did what Japan does with movie theater. I don't know if you guys know this, but so a lot of times in Japan, if you if you go to see a movie, and especially if it's a big movie, you will get a pamphlet when you go in, and it's partially like a souvenir, but it's also partially like almost like a playbill thing from going to see a play. So it's like, this is who made it, this is who's in it, this is, all that stuff. But like, especially for nerdy things, how cool would it be if you walked out of Robert Pattinson's Batman with here's Long Halloween, here's Batman's Hush, here's, like, I think it would
somebody do that once? That rings a serious bell.
Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't a movie theater take advantage of that? Partner with like the bookstore down the mall.
Yeah.
Well, part of it's because when you're talking the two different forms. You were saying, what does the viewer do when they're coming out? Well, what's next? Well, you could say the comics, but those who created the film, those who work in that form, they aren't interested in you going and checking out the comics. They're interested in you going to check out the sequel. That's where you're supposed to go next. And the comics, the different, where you have one, product existing in multiple media like that, those media don't necessarily dovetail. They could actually even be at loggerheads.
Yeah. It's a bummer because I think, especially as fans, it's so easy to think of things in terms of genre instead of medium, right? Like we want to think about Dune. We want to think about Paul Atreides. We want to think about what we see as a unifying theme of content across multiple medias. But to your point, John, like what incentive is there for some random executive at AT&T to be like, cool, for the Batman movie, we're going to do XYZ to promote other stuff that we produce? I think the only thing that some random executive at AT&T might want to do is like sign up for a new phone plan on AT&T, get 10% off your next movie theater ticket, or like, sign up for HBO Max, even though they own it. So
I really get the feeling, and the reason I said that was thinking of the MCU. You really get the feeling that the MCU folks, that Kevin Feige, Captain America, there's this sense of, this is our character now. He's ours. And the comics end of it would say, no, he comes from the comics. He's ours. So there is a little bit of tension in between those two as to whose character is it.
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens as the idea of the multiverse continues to expand within the MCU. One of my chief complaints with the MCU up until literally last year was the fact that everything was so siloed by media that like you could not have multiple versions of the same character, right? There's only one Loki in the MCU. There's only one Thor in the MCU. And now that we have this multiverse, that's expanding. Part of the reason that I've enjoyed the DCEU way more over the last 15 years is like, hey, if you don't like Batman, Batfleck, we have Gotham, we have Young Justice, we have Doom Patrol, we have like 8 million other versions of Batman for you to enjoy within the same medium. Whereas up until literally the last 10 months, the MCU was all very structured. And I think it's going to be really interesting.
Oh, that raises a really interesting question. I'd love to hear your thoughts on. And that's, again, the difference between the two media here. Are there going to be diminishing returns on taking that approach with the multiverse in the film, where you've got a target audience which isn't used to multiverses, and they're being introduced to this as a new thing? Can they deal with it or not? As opposed to, the comics media, where the readership is very used to it. And when it first popped up, we're talking Earth 2 and stuff, they were ready for it. They were right there with it. Yeah. So is there going to potentially be enough deviation there that there could be diminishing returns on multiverse stories in the cinematic context?
I think there's going to be diminishing returns on the MCU, period. And I think it's going to be really hard to nail down exactly why it is. I think the multiverse is actually definitely going to be part of it. But I also think that losing their core star power for a variety of reasons is going to be an even bigger part of it. Because I'm going to be perfectly honest, most people weren't going to see an MCU film. They were going to see Chris Evans as Captain America. They were going to see particular actors and particular characters, and most of those actors and characters are not there anymore. And what, again, this is like, I am well known for my relative dislike of the MCU, despite the fact that it introduced me to my best friend. Like there are so many reasons that I enjoy the MCU, but like they're Disney movies. They're Disney movies for boys. That was the remit that Kevin Feige was given, and he executed it perfectly. He did such a good job of giving us Disney princess movies for boys.
Yep.
But unlike like an animated franchise where you can say we're going to have a Rapunzel TV show that runs for 5 seasons on top of the 2 movies, you're kind of out of luck now. Like you don't have Chris Evans anymore. You have What If for a little while, but like you don't have Chris Evans as Captain America anymore. And I think that the star power that they relied on, unfortunately, is lagging. And like I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I love Shang-Chi. Like, yes, I'm here for it. I feel real weird about Black Panther too. I think I'm not the only one. Chadwick Boseman not being there feels so strange to me.
Mm-hmm.
I love the Eternals in comics. I love Kumail Nanjiani. I have zero interest in the Eternals movie. I do not want to see Angelina Jolie and Salma Hayek in a comic book movie. I just don't. I'm bored. Like, yeah.
I haven't figured out what reviewers I trust on this yet, but I'm not. Let's just say I'm not going to be lining up to. I'm not going to be fudging my kids' ages on the vaccination sheets so that I can get to a movie theater to see this.
I mean, yeah, because the pandemic also has a role to play in diminishing returns on movies, right? If you are exclusively releasing it in theaters, people have to make a lot of calculated choices about where their comfort safety is. Jim, to your earlier point, I don't think Villeneuve did himself any favors.
No, I don't think so.
I think the landscape of nerdy content is going to be so fascinating for the next couple years. Mm-hmm. And I think we're going to see an increasing dedication to television. I think Disney Plus, Disney Plus and HBO Max have really proven that there are successful ways for nerdy stuff to happen on television, and that you get a lot of returns out of them and a lot of toy sales out of them. And that's what a lot of these companies want. They want toy sales. So,
I mean, it does. It feels like Disney Plus is already driving the MCU bus, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like it feels like Eternals doesn't feel as important to the MCU story as Falcon and Winter Soldier did.
Yeah. Neither did Shang-Chi or Black Widow to me, frankly.
Black Widow, they missed the bus.
Yeah,
I thought it was good. I it was 5 years too late, but I thought it was a good movie.
That's the problem, and that goes back to the thing about Star Wars, right? You are telling me a story about a character that I already have very set feelings about and I feel very complicated about, and you're telling it to me 5 years after the fact, and I know that she's dead. Like, and to bring it back around to Dune a little bit, like maybe if we did have more of that cultural historical context of how to feel about Paul, how to feel about his dad, maybe it would have been a lot harder to sell this movie to so many people and sell Paul as a character to so many people. Like, if you know more about his family, I think that would have been harder.
Although knowing more about Oscar Isaac is always a plus, I feel like.
It's true. I really just want to know how they're going to handle Duncan Idaho, because like Duncan Idaho's character specifically gets so fucking weird that like,
I can't
how
wait.
Are we doing that in movie? I'm so excited.
Oh.
I mean, like I love Jason Momoa. So like, how are we explaining this? Oh my God.
He just, you know what? He was having too much fun. So he decided to hang around.
He has so much fun, like no matter what he's doing. I like it when it looks like people are having fun when they're at work.
I know.
Yes.
It's so great. And he's like the male Drew Barrymore, you know? He can't act his way out of a paper bag, but he has such just great energy coming through the screen. You don't care. You want to see more of this guy. You love this guy. You know?
I expected Aquaman to be a disaster, but he had the time of his life making that movie. And it was fantastic. Put him and The Rock in a movie and it will make infinity $1 billion.
It's true. It's very true. The look on his face when he crawled off the first helicopter and saw Timothée Chalamet and was like, my boy! And I was like,
yes,
that is your boy, Duncan! Yeah! That
Good
is
for
your
you.
boy. Good for you. I want actors, especially knowing how stressful and hard acting is and how hard it is to be on a movie set, especially one that filmed at a location like Dune. I'm like,
Yeah.
I hope y'all had just like the time of your lives making this movie. And I don't know if you guys saw the article about the one general that had like a parasol in one scene.
Yes, I didn't read the article.
He was not supposed to have a parasol. He was just hanging out at Crafty and getting his makeup touched up, and somebody handed him a parasol because it was hot out. And apparently Villeneuve walked up to him and was like, do you mind carrying that in the scene? That looks great. I think your character would have that. And I'm like, I love that kind of stuff. I think that's just great. Like super charming.
It's like William Shatner walking around with the tribble for the rest of the episode, even though there was no direction to it. No reason.
I think giving actors the space to like make, to your point, John, about like the script itself was very sparse on characterization. So giving the actors the opportunity to like make choices for the characters that they're portraying, I think is like really a cool way to like make the movie feel more robust.
Oh yeah. When it works, it is the best.
Yeah. It reminds me of all of my feelings about Margot Robbie. Every time she gets a role, I'm like, oh no, Margot Robbie is that person while she's filming the movie. Like she turns into Harley Quinn, and I trust her to be Harley Quinn. Like I trust her to be Tanya Harding somehow. Like
not just trust, value her in the role too.
Right.
Like
right.
In a role that real person doesn't necessarily have the same kind of value. Right?
I'm really glad, honestly, that we were able to see Dune at home, because like I haven't watched a movie trailer in 10 years. That is like, I do not watch movie trailers. I do not partake in scene pictures or anything until after I've seen the film. So usually my husband knows a lot more about a movie than I do when we watch it. He had somehow just like not heard anything about Dune other than it was happening. So every time somebody popped up on screen and he was like, is that Dave Bautista? And I was like, it is.
Yes.
And he was like, wait a minute. Is that one of the SARS guards? I was like, it is. And it was a delightful experience that if we'd been in a theater, obviously we wouldn't want to like disturb anybody else. So it was nice to have him be like, I'm excited. This is delightful. I enjoyed that.
Well, I just like
was great too.
Oh, he was. They were all
the tantrums, like his barely contained temper tantrum the whole time he was on screen was just fantastic.
Well, I like hearing too that you enjoyed it at home, because I have been wondering whether or not to recommend it to people who can't see it in the theater. You know, with his Blade Runner, I said, don't bother. I enjoyed it in the theater, but don't bother at home. You'll be bored out of your mind. So Dune has been an open question for me. So there you go. You've made up my mind.
It was truly, like, especially if you can do the thing where you can turn off all your lights, like you can like sit there. I think this is a complaint that we have about like a lot of like prestige television and prestige movies. It's a little dimly lit. So that's the hard part about watching it at home, is if you can't like actually get everything dark, it can be hard to see. But it was a delight to watch at home. I genuinely think having the subtitles on added something. We watch everything with subtitles in my house, just cause, and it was really interesting to see where they decided to translate things from other languages and where they decided not to. I think that's a really cool movie making choice, that not like it's an inside baseball thing, right? Not everybody cares, but I think it was a good experience. I do have. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to agree with you.
I have one question for you guys.
Yes.
If you have an idea, who would you want to play Alia of the Knife?
Oh, wow.
I haven't thought about it.
I'd have to think about that and get back to you.
That has been my favorite thing to talk to people about, because like particularly people who like, you know, loved Arya and Game of Thrones, or like have a very big attachment to like crazy young violent girls.
Yeah.
There's that scene.
It's a really tough question, actually.
Right.
And I mean, my gut is telling me I don't know the person. Yeah. I mean, I'm going down the list and I'm not seeing it. It's going to have to be someone I haven't seen before, maybe.
I'm trying to think of like who I see from like superhero TV stuff, because it's really all I watch right now.
Valid. A friend of mine reminded me that like Alia is a really creepy character in a lot of ways, right? Like a very unnerving child. And my brain went immediately to Millie Shapiro, who played the daughter in Hereditary. She has not really gotten any other work after that, but she is so capable of like really dialing up the just like, I'm an unsettling, creepy person and being really unhinged and violent when necessary. And I'm like, man, I would actually really like to see her take a stab at it. No pun intended, but like, just, I think it would be cool.
I have an image of a kid like jumping on somebody and ripping at their throat in my head.
Is it from Logan?
Yeah, it is. It should be her.
Oh, good call.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, no, it should totally be her.
I knew you were where you going with that one.
Yep, absolutely.
I don't know. There isn't the creepy there, though. There isn't the...
No, there's the violence.
She can do creepy. She can totally pull off creepy. What is her name? I got to find this.
Yeah, how old is she now, too? Because she was like 11 or 12 when they made the movie.
Daphne Keane.
Yeah, she's going to be in her early 20s now.
Is she?
She's 16. Okay, that's not, 16.
She might be able to pull it off. They could age her down. I think the age is a prohibitive. Oh yeah, she plays Lyra in His Dark Materials. She could pull off kid.
Yeah, it is hard because like that Alia of the Knife is supposed to be like a child, right? Like preteen, you know. So finding an actor that can pull off that kind of creep factor. Because if we were making this in another time, I'd be like, can we like clone Lily Taylor and like get like a child Lily Taylor? That would be really nice.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. I can see that. Okay.
Right? This is my favorite game is fan casting movies that haven't been made yet. Because it's like it tells you so much about like what people love watching and what people like in actors, you know.
I gotta think of recent vampire movies that I haven't seen but probably should watch, because if you're gonna find a creepy kid, it's going to be
Dunst, an Interview with a Vampire could have been Alia of the Knife.
Yep, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm glad that we have this shared experience of like creepy little girls in movies. It's wonderful. It's perfect.
Just keep a list in the back of our head in case we need it, right?
Yeah.
What's the big deal? It's not weird. All right. Well, I think we could probably go on for
I don't want to keep you all day, right?
Right.
Thank you for indulging my need to fan cast Alia. I think it's such a cool exercise to think about that. So
thank you so much for coming on. This has been I really could legitimately go on for another 2.5 hours talking about this.
Absolutely.
It's been a ton of fun. And we will have you back soon. We'll talk about manga.
Oh, there you go.
Please. I love comics so much. I read a comic that I was going to review the other day and I started crying and my husband walked in. He's like, what's going on? I was like, I just love comics so much. Like, I'm just overwhelmed. I don't know what to tell you.
It's so much fun. I'm going to go make a sandwich now.
Right? Like, okay, blow my nose. I got to go do the laundry.
Good talk, hon.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to talking again.
Absolutely. I hope you both have a great day.
You too. Thanks. Thanks as always for listening. And as per usual, the show was hosted by myself, John Odom, and Jim Dandino. And our theme music is by the ever-amazing Christopher Piatek. We'll see you next time.